Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are about to attempt to untangle one of the most intricate, really mind-bending shows ever created, the Netflix series Dark.
Oh, definitely.
If you've ever tried to follow its loops and paradoxes and those, incredibly tangled family trees, you know it's a real challenge. And you are absolutely not alone in feeling like your brain is doing, like, acrobatics across time.
That's exactly right. And for this deep dive, we've got a pretty fascinating collection of source material. It was actually provided by a listener who, like so many of us, I think, is determined to get a clearer grasp on Dark's deepest mysteries,
Yeah.
especially concerning that ending and, the really dense concepts behind it all.
Our sources are quite a mix, aren't they? Both representative of how people tried to make sense of this show.
Yeah.
We've got a deep dive Reddit theory post connecting the core players, Jonas and Martha, to Adam and Eve.
Okay.
We've got an eye-opening interview transcript with the actual show creators, which is great.
Very useful.
A dedicated article trying to map that sprawling timeline. Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
A review from the Oxford Blue, which dissects the space-time paradoxes and some German philosophy woven in. And then several other Reddit discussions picking apart symbols and that very hotly debated conclusion.
So our mission, basically, is to extract the most crucial insights, maybe some surprising connections, and the core knowledge from this stack. The goal is to help you make sense of Dark's incredible narrative complexity.
Right.
And its philosophical foundations, the powerful symbolic language it uses, and ultimately to shed some meaningful light on its controversial ending.
Yeah, this isn't a show that holds your hand, is it? And our sources definitely reflect that. So get ready to really dig in and think with us. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start with a show built on, well, time itself?
You almost have to start with the foundational concept, right? Everything is connected in a never-ending cycle. The show drills this into you, especially early on, with that signature German phrase, der Anfang ist das Ende und das Ende ist der Anfang.
The beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. And it becomes clear really quickly this isn't just like poetic language. For the first couple of seasons, the sources really emphasized that the show operates on these strict closed time loops.
Right.
And causal determinism.
Right. It feels relentless.
It does. Events must happen exactly as they always have. Every character's attempt to change the past, no matter how desperate they are, only seems to ensure that the very thing they dreaded, well, it comes to pass.
It's a really brutal kind of fate, isn't it? The sources we looked at draw parallels to things like ancient Greek tragedies like Oedipus, or the whole concept of hubris.
Oh, yeah.
Where defying destiny is precisely how you end up fulfilling it. Your actions, the ones born from this desire to break free, they become the very threads that weave the tapestry of what already happened. Host, speaker.
Yeah.
And reinforcing that is the bootstrap paradox or causal loop, which is that's the idea where an object or piece of information exists within the timeline, but it doesn't have a clear origin point.
Exactly. It's like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. The thing you use to pull yourself up shouldn't really exist yet.
The perfect example in Dark, the classic one, is the time machine itself. Or, well, the plans for it.
Right. The blueprints.
Tannhaus gets them from a future version of Claudia. But where did she get them? It loops back. There's no original inventor outside the loop. The plans are just there, an effect with no independent first cause.
Which really just hammers home the deterministic nature of these worlds.
It really does.
I remember reading in the creator interview, they mentioned committing to this deterministic path early on was a very deliberate choice. They felt, from a theoretical physics standpoint, if time travel were possible, this paradoxical predetermined outcome almost felt, well, logically necessary, even if it's wild science fiction.
Right. It's like a rigid rule they set for themselves.
Yeah.
And it pays off, I think. It creates that inescapable tension for the characters, but it also lays the groundwork for the show's really rich symbolic language.
Oh, speaking of language, the show is just packed with visual symbols, isn't it? The sources point out how these aren't just like background decoration. They actually track the story's evolution.
Yeah, definitely. The most recognizable one, especially early on and tied heavily to the Sigmundus group, is the triquetra.
That three-pointed knot.
That's the one. It's pretty directly associated with the three main time periods the cave passage initially connects, 1953, 1986, and 2019. It represents that primary cycle, that initial loop structure.
But then as the show expands, the symbols kind of shift too, right? The sources noted the increased prominence of the infinity symbol, particularly once the second world, Eva's world, is introduced. That symbol seems to visually capture the looping connection, not just within one timeline, but between Adam's world and Eva's world.
Exactly. And don't forget the Penrose Triangle. We see it on Tannhaus's book, A Journey Through Time.
Right, the impossible triangle.
Yeah, that impossible shape, like a perpetual staircase. It's often depicted as a Mobius strip, that surface that only has one side. And what's fascinating is how perfectly this imagery captures that feeling of being caught in a cycle where past, present, and future selves seem to exist simultaneously on this single twisted path.
Yeah, one source pointed out something really clever. If you draw a Penrose triangle and kind of twist it like a Mobius strip, it can visually resemble the triquetra.
Oh, interesting.
It's like these symbols are different ways of seeing the same fundamental concept, this cyclical, perpetual movement, scaling up from the cave loops to the meta loop of the two worlds. It's kind of a visual shorthand for the show's expanding scope.
It truly is. And this isn't just about, physics and symbols. Dark is deeply, almost relentlessly philosophical.
Oh, absolutely. That Oxford Blue Review especially highlighted the Nietzschean connections. If you think about Adam's whole motivation,
Right.
he wants to destroy time, which he sees as this prison created by something like divine will or fate. It directly mirrors Nietzsche's idea of destroying the concept of God to make way for the Übermensch.
The Overman.
Yeah, the individual who transcends traditional morality and becomes master of their own destiny. Adam basically sees himself as that figure, someone who will create a new beginning by destroying the old order.
And supporting the show's initial deterministic view, there's that quote from Arthur Schopenhauer that this show uses directly. Man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants.
Oof, yeah.
Yeah.
That hits hard in this context.
It's so central to the character's plight, isn't it? They make choices, they act on desires, but the philosophy suggests those desires, those wills, were never truly theirs to choose. They're driven by forces, fates, inherent natures they just don't control.
So you feel like you're making a decision,
Right.
but you were always going to make that decision within the loop anyway. Which just makes you wonder throughout the whole show, are they truly exercising agency, or are they just playing out a script that's already written?
That question just hangs over everything.
It really does. And it becomes a massive point of debate. When you get to the ending, does the show ever truly escape that deterministic cage? Or is the resolution somehow still contained within its own rules? It's tricky.
And Dark also layers in these deep biblical allusions. The names aren't random at all. They serve a purpose in highlighting certain themes.
That Reddit theory post we looked at made a really compelling argument for viewing Jonas and Martha as symbolic Adam and Eve.
Yeah, I saw that.
In a strange, twisted way, they are the progenitors. Their intertwined lives, their choices, are central to the creation and perpetuation of those tangled family trees and the entire looping existence in their respective worlds.
And in that interpretation, the primordial sin isn't, eating an apple from a tree.
Right.
The sources suggest it's more like the initial rebellion against time itself, the attempt to control or manipulate the fundamental order, which then locks humanity into this cycle of suffering and repetition.
And Claudia Tiedemann, she's often cast in the role of the serpent, or maybe the white devil, as she's sometimes called.
Right. Ambiguous figure.
Definitely. Initially, you see her manipulating characters, particularly Jonas, kind of pushing him towards certain actions. She tempts them with knowledge or the promise of change, much like the biblical serpent tempting Eve.
But her role is complex. She's the tempter who, paradoxically, becomes the truth seeker and maybe the key to breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
The God particle gets mentioned too, not necessarily as the forbidden fruit itself, but as this powerful discovery, a technology that can be abused.
Like nuclear energy, maybe.
Exactly, like nuclear energy in our world. It's not inherently evil, but in the wrong hands or used with the wrong intentions, like trying to conquer or control time, it leads to pretty disastrous consequences.
And there's even a nod in some discussions to the idea of a messiah figure, someone who sacrifices themselves to end the original sin, the knot. You're kind of left to ponder if any character or event in Dark truly fits that archetype, providing salvation through some final, ultimate sacrifice.
The complexity just really ramps up when the other world, Eva's world, gets introduced in season 2.
Yeah, and the sources are very clear on this distinction, which I think is important. This isn't presented as an alternate timeline created by someone changing something in Adam's world.
Right, not like Back to the Future.
Exactly. It's presented as a distinct, already existing parallel universe. It has its own history, its own versions of characters, often like twisted or mirrored reflections of those in the first world. Alt-Martha isn't just a result of Jonas changing the past. She's from the reality next door, basically.
And these two distinct realities, they don't just exist side by side, they become deeply intertwined. They form this larger two-world knot, what one source called a metaloop.
A meta-loop, I like that.
Yeah, it's not just a loop within one world anymore. The cycle encompasses both worlds, and they're forever influencing each other.
The Elizabeth and Charlotte relationship across the worlds is the absolute perfect, most mind-bending example of this meta-loop, isn't it?
Oh my God, yes.
They are literally mother and daughter to each other in this endless looping relationship that only makes sense, if you can call it that, when you see how the two worlds are locked together. It's one of the most brilliant and confusing paradoxes in the whole show.
Absolutely. And within this just mind-boggling complexity, Claudia Tiedemann emerges as the one who seems determined to find the actual truth and maybe a way out.
It's a fascinating turn for her character, who was initially portrayed much more as the manipulator, the white devil.
It is, and her major discovery, according to the sources, is the existence of a third original world. This isn't another parallel world created by the loops, it's the reality that existed before everything went wrong.
The source point, almost.
Pretty much. This origin world is where H.G. Tannhaus lived with his family, his son Merrick, daughter-in-law Sonja, and their little daughter. The sources really highlight that the tragic death of his family in a car crash was the catalyst.
Right.
His profound grief led him to build his time machine. He was trying to change the past, to save them.
But instead of saving his family in his own reality, his machine inadvertently, splintered reality, creating the two looping worlds, Adams and Evas, that are caught in that endless knot.
That seems to be the explanation the sources land on. So Claudia realizes the only way to sever the knot, to break the entire cycle encompassing both Adam's and Eva's worlds, is to go back to the very point of origin.
And prevent the accident.
Can prevent the accident that caused those worlds to be created in the first place.
Which brings us to that climactic and, really debated ending.
Guided by Claudia's knowledge, Jonas and Alt-Martha travel to the origin world.
They find the bridge, the road where the accident was supposed to happen, and they intervene. They stop the car carrying Merrick, Sonja, and their daughter. The crash is prevented.
And the immediate, profound consequence. Because Tannhaus's family survives, he never has that all-consuming grief, so he has no reason to build the machine. Meaning, the two looping worlds we've spent 3 seasons in Adam's world, Eva's world, they were never created.
Wow. And if those worlds never existed, then the vast majority of the characters we know, the ones born from those loops, including Jonas and Martha themselves,
they can't exist either.
They just fade away.
Yeah.
Holding hands as their reality is undone. It's incredibly powerful and honestly incredibly sad.
It is. The creators, in their interview, described it as, at its core, a big love story between Jonas and Martha. And they felt it provided answers, tied things up, even if the outcome was tragic for so many characters we cared about.
Which lands us squarely on the core controversy that played out in so many of our sources, especially those Reddit threads. Does this ending actually work within the show's own established rules? Does it solve the paradoxes, or does it just create a massive, unavoidable one?
Yeah, that's the big question. Many viewers felt it was a clear violation of the causal determinism the show had so meticulously built up over 3 seasons.
It feels like a classic grandfather paradox, right?
Exactly. Jonas and Martha exist because of the loops caused by the accident. If they go back and prevent the accident, their world shouldn't exist, meaning they shouldn't exist to prevent the accident, so the accident should still happen. It seems to create this fundamental contradiction.
But the sources offered other ways to maybe look at it. Perhaps it was a deliberate artistic choice by the creators, a statement, rather than a strictly logical resolution within the established physics.
Or maybe it could be interpreted through, quantum concepts. Schrodinger's cat was mentioned. Maybe the accident both did happen, creating the looped worlds, and didn't happen in the origin world where it was prevented, existing in some kind of superposition until Jonas and Martha collapsed that state by intervening.
That's an interesting take.
Another interpretation floated was that the origin world simply operates under different rules. Maybe it's outside the deterministic laws governing the two created worlds, allowing this one intervention to have a truly world-altering, reality-breaking effect.
And then there's that fascinating theory, almost mystical, that Jonas and Martha are somehow the returning souls or spirits of Merrick and Sonja, guided back to their original forms.
Right. The sources even pointed out the anagram connection between the names Merrick, Tannhaus, and Sonja can rearrange to hint at Jonas.
That's such a neat detail. It lends a kind of poetic weight to that idea,
Yeah.
even if it's not strictly scientific.
It does. It leaves you with a very bittersweet feeling, though, doesn't it? Most of the characters we followed are just gone. But the sources also highlight that the original trauma, Tannhouse's grief that fueled everything, is healed.
And some characters who weren't direct results of the looping family trees do seem to exist in that final origin world, seeing people like Hannah, Katharina, Regina, Uller.
Presumably living a life untouched by the not suffering.
So maybe it's not a happy ending, but a resolved one.
The creators seemed to feel it was a true end, a resolution to the central conflict, even if not everyone was happy with it. And based on the source debates, it certainly got people talking and thinking for a long time.
Pulling back slightly, that creator interview offered some interesting little behind-the-scenes details, too. They confirmed they knew the ending from the very beginning.
Which helps explain that feeling of the plot being so meticulously woven together, even if the resolution itself sparks debate.
Yeah.
They talked about how complex the scripts were, describing them as looking almost like mathematical formulas just to keep track of all the different versions of characters across times and worlds.
I can only imagine. Must have been a nightmare to track.
Apparently, the actor who played Martha found navigating her multiple versions and what each one knew at any given moment particularly challenging, which is understandable.
Oh, absolutely. And a strong recommendation came through from both the creators and fans in the sources.
Yeah.
Watch the show in the original German with subtitles if you can.
Yes, definitely. They stress that losing the actor's actual voice in dubbing means losing half the performance. Their vocal choices are apparently that important to the characterization.
That makes sense for a show this intense.
There was even a small but telling anecdote about an early subtitle error. The German musical cue description duster, meaning somber or gloomy, was initially translated as dismal music in the English subtitles.
Oh, like bad quality music.
Exactly, which implies bad quality rather than the intended mood. They corrected it later, but it just shows how much nuance can be lost in translation, especially with a show so reliant on atmosphere and tone.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed through these endless cycles, deciphered symbols, wrestled with some deep philosophy and biblical parallels, navigated parallel worlds, and debated the ultimate paradox of the ending. The sources really underscore the show's incredible ambition and planning, even if that final act leaves room for interpretation. It masterfully blends these really complex sci-fi concepts with fundamental human themes like grief, love, family legacy, and the illusion of control.
It's definitely a show that rewards every moment you spend thinking about it. You keep seeing new layers and connections with each viewing, or even just talking about it like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder as you sit with all this. If the world we witnessed in Dark, all that struggle, the pain, the love, the loss, if it only came into existence because of an event that was ultimately prevented,
Right.
by characters who only existed because of that event, causing their entire reality to just dissolve, does that make the whole story we watched and all the characters we grew to care so much about, were they nothing more than a temporary fluctuation, a brief, intense, almost ephemeral dream that never quite solidified into a permanent reality?
A truly provocative thought to end on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the complex, very naughty world of Winden.
Until next time.